So, friends, we are now live on Facebook, and also the webinar has begun. So I would like to welcome everybody, Bula Vinaka, and greetings, and welcome to this International Day of Peace virtual peace table, focusing on a global reset for peace. My name is James Bhagwan. I'm the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches, and I will be your moderator for this Talanoa, this virtual peace Talanoa. Some of us are sitting at tables, some of us are sitting at desks, on couches. If we were all together in the Pacific, we would probably have a mat somewhere nice where we could sit down and enjoy the weather. Hey, this is the virtual mat and the virtual table. And as we're often reminded, if the table is too small, we need to redesign the table. Everywhere across the globe, people have been greatly affected by the impacts of both climate change and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic. And in many cases, the responses to climate crises and the pandemic have failed to support and protect the most vulnerable communities. The events of 2020 have shed a light on those systems that have failed to deliver security for people. It has also shown that a different world is possible. How do we turn that tide and redesign the table to shape the world that we want to see? How can we ensure that all voices are heard to address the challenges we are faced with during and beyond the pandemic? And how do we make sure to amplify local initiatives to transform global and regional commitments to inclusive human security? In this virtual peace table, we have Peacebuilders joining us to discuss the peace-development-humanitarian nexus, challenging us in the Pacific region. And during this Talanoa, we look to them to shed a light on thriving local initiatives in the region that have the ability to transform the way we look at security and have the power to shape the peaceful world that we would like to see. Joining us in our Talanoa today, we have representing the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, Agus Wandi, joining us from Lambasa, who's in the office today, one of our young peace builders, Lucille Shute. We have Michelle Higelin from ActionAid Australia and Shifting the Power Coalition, addressing the peace and humanitarian nexus. We have Mary Joyce from the Peace Boat in Japan, and Dr. Sue Weiss, who is a regional advisor for social and human sciences for Asia and the Pacific. We also have one of our friends from the Pacific Center for Peace Building, who will share a peace message, part of the GPPAC Pacific Network. So welcome everybody, and particular welcome to our friends, our sisters and brothers joining us on Facebook Live, and also tuning in through the Zoom network. I'm going to invite Sharon to begin with an opening statement. Sharon is a second-generation Pacific feminist, current board chair of GPPAC, the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, and the GPPAC Regional Representative for the Pacific, Technical Advisor of the Shifting the Power Coalition. Since 2009, she's been the Gender Liaison of GPPAC's International Steering Group and has served on several UN advisory committees addressing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a happy Peace Day to everyone, and welcome to the virtual table to all our colleagues joining us today. We come together today as a global community of peace builders and activists committed to the values of equality, inclusion, and transformative action in conflict prevention and peace building. We're amplifying the call together to invest in a peace building architecture that brings all stakeholders, civil society, including women and youth, national governments, regional intergovernmental organizations, and development partners to come together to the table to share analysis, enabling policy and program coherence and complementarities. Working for peace together requires us to redesign the table and shift the power to those who have the biggest stake in sustaining peace in the region. women, young people, faith leaders, and local communities. In the Pacific region, this requires specific strategies to address cross-border challenges and supporting the prevention of the resurgence of violence, addressing the shrinking political spaces for civil society activism, as well as the pressures on national media organizations to report, bringing light on the needs of civil society peace-building networks, as well as produce media content and policy briefs that address peace and security priorities. Additionally, while most of the Pacific Islands states are fairly new independent countries, particularly since the 1970s, political independence remains a priority for the Francophone countries who are still seeking a just resolution to the humanitarian impact of nuclear testing. This is also the case in the Republic of Marshall Islands. So greater efforts are needed to support the advocacy at the UN Committee on Decolonization and Peace-Building Initiatives for a peaceful transition for political independence in Papua. And this is led by the work of the Pacific Conference of Churches as one of the members of GPPAC. At the regional level, this is what we're seeing as GPPAC Pacific. The climate crisis and addressing the humanitarian impact of nuclear testing in our region is one of the reasons why, as peace builders, we continue to call for greater emphasis on human security approach to regional and national security in line with a number of commitments. The Boe Declaration, human security and conflict prevention frameworks, the regional framework on security sector governance, and the regional action plan on women, peace and security are a number of commitments made by our governments. Earlier this year, the thematic consultation organized by GPPAC in collaboration with the Shifting the Power Coalition created a space for local and international civil society, member states and the United Nations to better unpack ways to address the peace, development and humanitarian nexus. So I'm really hoping that today's dialogue in Talanoa will also be a way to further demonstrate how we're making this approach. The consultation on gender, climate and peace in the Pacific has reaffirmed that a key priority for women first responders, faith communities and peace builders of all diversities is to connect all parts of the triple nexus through a gender lens. And this is evident through the GPPAC Pacific and Shifting the Power Coalition-led initiatives, which include food security programs, ongoing outreach and community-based dialogue and prevention work, human security assessments, the use of innovative information and communication platforms, as well as the mainstream media, and the provision of emergency grants tackling the vulnerabilities of women and girls. We have a number of recommendations that I'd like to share as a way of us to think about how our conversation today can also assist in guiding some of these recommendations further. So one is about multi-stakeholder coordination and how this can take place from the local or sub-national level to the national and of course regional levels that is able then to better connect peace building, development and humanitarian efforts so that we can address the drivers of conflict or the drivers of violence, including during disasters and humanitarian crises. In order to better activate a triple nexus approach, we noted in our consultation earlier this year that we needed to strengthen regional peace-building capacities and coordination of a joint response. We need to better align local and government efforts, and we need to strengthen gender-sensitive analysis in framing current responses to COVID and any other upcoming crises. In the Pacific region, we're getting closer and closer to our next cyclone season. More specifically, taking a triple nexus approach should also include the development of a regular multi-stakeholder process that enables all stakeholders to share, access, and discuss our different vantage points, the different ideas, and what we're hearing in our communities, so that we can better understand together the risks and get better at the response. We need to strengthen the application of a human security approach in line with the Boe Declaration. We need to ensure funding for peace building is flexible and reflects the changing nature of threats. We hope that donors, for example, will go beyond traditional peace building funding and learn from local level responses methods that we are already using in the Pacific in tackling this triple nexus. There's also a need to have better alignment between national and local efforts. For example, the current Pacific humanitarian pathway and the COVID-19 response could get better at integrating a conflict prevention approach, which would then also support national humanitarian policies and management systems and partnerships to better engage with peace builders in the community. It also requires building the capacity of national and local actors to get better at peace building and sustaining peace. And then, of course, there's the gender analysis, the use of intentional use of a gender lens when it comes to designing prevention and response programs. So sustaining peace for us goes beyond this one single day, but today certainly brings us all together to have conversations. And we welcome our partners from the UN system to be part of this conversation today, because you do have a very important role in making the connections, in facilitating these multi-stakeholder processes and enabling us to undertake the different activities from dialogue and mediation to peace education. Together for Peace this year for GPPAC is an important call for collective action. We're also commemorating GPPAC's 15th year of being a global network, our 15th anniversary of global collective action. We're also commemorating the anniversaries of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and 2250. And there's also the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Today is a day that we come together as members of a global network to continue to bring attention to local action, the collective action, the innovative and transformative action for peace in our communities. So for us as GPPAC Pacific, we'll continue to call for a regional peace building architecture that brings everybody together, that enables us to redesign the table, to have conversations that help us build, sustain, and keep the momentum going as we face the new challenges that 2020 has brought to us. Thank you once again for being part of this conversation today. Binaka Shukriya.
Thank you, Sharon. And now we do this one camera job where this is how it all began in the early days of broadcasting, I tell you for sure. Yeah, thank you very much for that, for those opening remarks and setting the scene, basically setting the table for us in this conversation this morning. Our next speaker for today is Agus Wandi. Agus is the Senior Peace and Development Advisor based in the UN Resident Coordinator's Office. Well, he's based with the office. He will join in the office in the next few weeks when he can get a flight out of Indonesia and into Suva. The UN Resident Coordinator's Office, of course, covers the Federated States of Micronesia, Fiji, Kiribati, the Marshall Islands. Agus, in his own right, working in this area, has been with the UN for about a decade, if I'm not mistaken, the big 10 years this year, and is representing the UN coordinator, Sanaka, in his initial statements, but also will be sharing from his own experience as he's had some time in the Pacific. So I'm going to invite Agus now to share a reflection for us. Agus? Thank you. August, if you could put your mic on. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Reverend James, and colleagues and everyone who very kindly having us here in this wonderful event. Happy International Peace Days to all of you. And as Sharon said, this is not one day event, and hopefully something that we do celebrate every year. I will be, both as Reverend said, representing Sanaka, but also probably sharing some of thoughts and personal experience in this discussion. And I take a lot of notes what Sharon said about engagement, multi-stakeholders engagement and various partnership that could be built from this meeting. So this is something that we are exploring, and we'll try to shape this together with all of you, how best we do it in the Pacific, in the region. So that is to begin with. But few things that I have to go through the formal part, which is read what RC intervention is supposed to be. So I do that, and then add a little bit what I, and or probably mix a little bit what between RCO position and remarks for this event. So, well, thank you for having the UN Resident Coordinator's Office. Unfortunately, our RC is not able to participate at this virtual peace table today, but we thanks Global Partnership for the Prevention of Arms Conflict for letting us to be here and say a few words to commemorate the International Peace Day for Peace. As a PDA in the Pacific, today is also an important reminder for us, for the peace building team and others, that in the context of the review of sustaining peace agenda that we have been working, we have been engaging with many great colleagues and good friends, including Action Aid Australia, GPPAC, Peace Board, and UNESCO. So we are very delighted to see many of you here, and this is a good reflection table and session for us as well. We are very interested in some of the central question for this discussion, especially around the resilience, because this is one of the key agenda and key topics for the UN Pacific Office, and we are working with all partners in on this issue in building a more resilient region, in an inclusive region that involve everyone in pushing various agenda. And but before we come to these topics, I would like to say a few words on peace and security challenges in this COVID-19 environment, because this has been highlighted greatly by the UN Security Council, by the UN leadership on this topic. The UNSG highlighted about 8 risks to international peace and security, and then recently I think the Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo highlighted 3 that I would like to highlight here, because this is I think something important for our region and for the Pacific and globally. And this includes the 3 risks, key risks for peace and security. The first one is the erosion of trust in public institution, and this I will not go into detail of this, but we have been witnessing this regionally and globally also, and this is something that we are all of us need to work on. And then the second risk is the aggravation of certain human rights challenges during the pandemic, and this is reflected in various policy decisions being made that both trying to strike, I guess, the balance between the how to prevent the spread of the virus, but also at the same time is limiting certain or giving certain constraint to the basic rights and of the citizen. So we are on broader human rights constraint, during the pandemic. So we are witnessing this. And then the third area that really important is we have seen tension, political and tension, and also affecting the peace processes in some part of the world, and including there's tension in the Pacific that could lead, if not being managed properly, into conflicts that that have bigger impact both to the Faroes country but to the region. And we have, I will not go into detail, we will not go into detail of these places, but there are a few hotspots areas in the region that we are really have to pay attention. And the UN Resident Coordinator Office working closely on monitoring this situation. So this is the three risk area that we are really focusing. And then on this commemoration of Peace Day, we really want to engage with a lot of you on how we can prevent this. And in addition to that, of course, we believe working on is creating culture of peace. And this is something very important in the Pacific, and many involvement of civil society actors and groups in promoting culture of peace, promoting sustaining peace, including a lot of by amazing women and youth leaders, young people that are taking part in that process. So we really want to celebrate that as well. And the SG has been very clear on this, that creating a culture of peace means also supporting dialogues with those who are different, and respect, empathy, and protection of human rights and dignity. And this must be our guide, even in the most difficult situation or circumstances. That is a message from SG, but we try to apply this and work on this also in our region. So our position is we believe there's a need for dialogues there, not only with those we agree with, but also with those we sometimes have the issue with. So that is the fundamental of dialogue itself. So and today, and COVID-19 also have shown us that lesson, that everything interconnected, everything things that Pacific countries, Pacific region that in terms of health risk probably less than others, but cannot escape that challenges and issue we face globally as a result of this COVID. And then we also, in addition to that, there is a risk with existential threat of climate change. I mean, the president of Marshall Islands actually wrote a very interesting op-ed today in The Guardian, highlighting this, and also during the launch of our climate security projects recently, all the 3 atoll countries, and it is of course beyond the 3 atoll countries, talking and focusing and appealing for everyone on the need to act, not in the future, not in the short term, not in the medium term, but now on the climate change and the climate security challenges. So this is, we are really subscribe to that position, and we would like to work with everyone, with all of you on this. And there's no, the geographical history experiences of many places is one thing, but we believe there is a common shared values, common messages and principle that we can work with all of us on peace building, on conflict prevention, and sustaining the agenda, this collective agenda in the region. I think also interesting, last Tuesday, last week, we commemorate the International Day of Peace, International Day of Democracy, and this is, I think, can be linked closely. We, as the RCO, provide and highlighted a call to for dialogues for all, highlighted the needs for respect to human rights, highlighted that even in this difficult situation that many countries facing, many the government have to deal with, that the democratic space need to be respected, dialogues need to be promoted, and human rights need to be enhanced. So that is, we really, I think, closely linked to our discussion today. Our message is really increase the dialogues and public participation in decision-making processes with all, at all levels as well. And then our position is really on build effective partnership and relationship with many actors in the within the country, within the region, and globally as well. So we are in the context of support for the UN office. We will continue to do this. Our priority and critical focus is really on inclusivity and multi-sectoral responses in this recovery process. And this also applies to the humanitarian response and humanitarian challenges in the region. Our priority and focus also is really the principle of protecting civic space, respect for human rights and the rule of law, and also the need for the leadership, the national leadership, to have a more stronger capacity and take the ownership in pushing forward many agenda. UN currently, as many of you know, we are working under the new system of UN development system reform, which started beginning of last year. There has been review and the purpose of the UN. Under the RC, as Reverend James said, we are focusing here on 10 Pacific countries collectively as a UN system, as wide UN system, with all agencies is part of one UN that work cohesively together. We are supporting on all across this agency through various entry points, from prevention to human security to the broader development agenda, all across the agencies. And this is something that I think we will continue to work closely with you, but also with the leadership at the national and regional level. The RC office is here, is part of your network, part of your partners here. The key things for us also to become much more effective and efficient, because there have been some input and feedback to the UN that can work better. We recognize that, and we will continue to work cohesively across agency, across country, and in the Pacific in particular for us. And then to be strategic also and effective, we also really want to improve, and as part of our principle, improve this bridging the gap, I guess, if you want to use that word, on with all partners to make sure the effectiveness of our work, especially in the context of promoting inclusivity. We would like to see more marginalized, at-risk, and discriminated groups actually being focused on across responses by national actors, but also by the UN itself. And as we grapple, I think, with this COVID-19, with the climate change, with natural disaster, we believe that fostering this social cohesion and public trust is the key. And it's a key component for mitigating risk, the key component on building resilience that we talked about in the earlier discussion. So this is something that that we want to highlight here. And lastly, I would end, I think, our intervention here with, we are very delighted to take some initiative, and especially I think recently we just launched this peace building climate security projects. This is an example of an entry point that how we can work together. If some of you probably participate in the launch, it's showing that how even if an effort like this and more in need of the effort like this to be done collectively. We need to bring national actors, civil society groups, the UN leaderships into one efforts, one space, one agenda on building the capacity of the region in dealing with climate security challenges. Hopefully, that will be the basis for future endeavors, future work, future programming that we can work with all of you. And we believe this is something, a journey that we want to take together with all of you. And thank you for having us, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with all of you. Offer to you, James. James, I think we cannot hear you. Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to test if you could read my lips. No, but that's I just wanted to say thank you very much, and the intervention, particularly around the challenges around COVID, but also recognizing the continuous work to really build that culture of peace or inculcate that culture of peace, the necessary dialogues, the difficult conversations that need to happen, the challenge of recognizing interconnectivity, which is quite important, specifically when we're coming from different perspectives, and of course the new climate security and peace building project that the UN has just recently launched. On that note, perhaps it's good to come to our next intervention, which is going to be from Lucille, who is a community-based volunteer and focal point for the Pacific Network of GPPAC, and also for the Shifting the Power Coalition. She's based on our second largest island here in Fiji, Vanuatu, from the lovely town of Lambasa, where some people affectionately refer to as Nebraska. But on a serious note, Lucille, as a member of an important regional alliance working to progress the peace and development and humanitarian nexus, brings more than a decade's worth of work in the Fijian Pacific feminist and peace building community, where she's been involved locally, nationally, and regionally, working in community media productions, as well as in advocacy on the inclusion of diverse rural women, in particular young women. Through her work today, she works collaboratively with diverse women, including traditional and faith leaders and women with disabilities, and in collaboration with the GPPAC Pacific Network, members in Bougainville, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Fiji, to undertake human security assessments, disaster response, and local peace building. And as an avid producer of content on these issues, she's committed to amplifying and bringing visibility to rural women and young women's peace and human security priorities to the attention of civil society, government leaders, and to the rest of the world. So, Lucille, Bulubinaka, Bulure, welcome. In the context of the work that you've been doing, particularly around working in your regional networks, and we've shared the different countries that you're engaged in, my question to you to perhaps begin your intervention is, what is the world that we want? What is the Pacific vision and recommendations for our Pacific region that you have heard in your conversations?
Thank you, Reverend. So since March this year, I've been engaging and hearing stories from the women around Vanuatu and in the Pacific as well, especially stories of young women who, because of COVID-19, have lost their jobs and that having to return to the rural areas, going back to their villages. There has been a lot of shift from urban to rural areas, and having to find other things that they are able to do for their sustainable living, and hearing from women living with disability, caregivers who are not well informed of their children's disability and the specific needs in their communities, because they are so out of the urban areas, and having to learn their specific needs for their child, and they have to find this out on their own. So this costs a lot for most of them. But one of a lot of the solutions that I've heard from the rural communities are having this thing called Solivaki, especially for those that are coming back to their rural homes. Solivaki is where the community helps the people that are affected coming back into the village by giving them seedlings and plants to start their lives back in the village. And yes, for the world we want, or recommendations, is I think a world free of COVID-19, with freedom of movements, safety with dignity for women and the vulnerable communities, where there is non-violence, peace and justice is maintained. I would recommend that the Pacific region engage with levels of inclusivity, equality with more solidarity, and collaborative measures to advocate effectively and more efficiently towards the climate crisis that we face and the environment change, so that we're able to progress together in mainly to achieve the SDG goals for 2021 and beyond.
Thank you, Lucille. I think just before I let you go and we move to the next intervention, just maybe a follow-up question to what you've shared. This concept of Solivaki, where I guess a rough translation would be around community well-being, where the community comes together and really looks after the needs of everyone there. How do you have a truly inclusive community where the care is holistic, it cares for everyone there? We've seen this as, particularly in Fiji and in other communities with different definitions in the Pacific, a response to the global pandemic, the impact, and particularly in the Pacific, while we have large numbers of COVID cases in Mahi Nui, in West Papua, in Guam, and also in Australia and New Zealand as our extended Pacific family. We see the impact of COVID-19 economically and socially. How have you seen Solivaki working as an example of really the kind of peace that you're talking about, as an example of that world? How has that been for you and what you've seen in the communities?
Thank you. Because most of these people that are coming back to their communities haven't been back there from when they've shifted out and they've gone to urban, and they're working. They've been working in the urban areas for over 20, 30 years. So just losing their jobs all of a sudden and going back is it's not an easy, what can I say, transition to go back to your villages. Some of them, it's their children, it's their first time to be going back to the rural communities. And so that's where the people in the rural communities see that they need that help. So in a way for them to create that peace in their community, instead of, you just start your own life with nothing, and when you come back, they would bring things to them, like what I was saying, seedlings, or they go and help them with their plantations, just to get them to get used to that life again that they have left behind. So Salavaki, a lot of them have seen that it's working good in their rural communities, because it's having the other families that have come in not feeling left out or behind. So they do those working together so that they're able to move together as one community, especially in this time of this COVID-19 crisis.
Naka, thank you. Thank you very much, Lucille. Wish this camera thing is fun. Right. What I gather from your explanation around the responses to COVID-19, Sole Sollevaki really talks about peace building from the perspective of strengthening human security and building indigenous Pacific resilience, which I think is a very important issue. And within the context of the peace-development-humanitarian nexus, this is something that is happening at the grassroots level. Perhaps if we can now, from the grassroots level, kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the regional level from an intervention that I'm going to ask Michelle Hijalin to share with us. Michelle is the Executive Director of ActionAid Australia. She has more than 2.5 decades of experience working to advance women's rights in Australia and internationally, including as the former Deputy General Secretary of one of the largest women's rights groups movements globally, the World YWCA. And I can say that with a sense of pride, having once been a member of the local Y in Lautoka. Yes, it's open to all. See, this is a beautiful thing. Michelle has served on the global advisory groups to the UN Population Fund, UNFPA, and the UN World Food Programme, and has convened the NGO Working Group on Peace at the United Nations in Geneva. For the past 6 years, Michelle has worked with ActionAid, driving gender transformative development and humanitarian programming. And during this time, she chaired the Humanitarian Reference Group and the Gender Community of Practice for the Australian Council for International Development. She's currently part of the Leadership Council for Australian Progress and on the board of Emergency Action Alliance. So, Michelle, opportunities that we can look at in terms of not only addressing the humanitarian development peace nexus, but also in terms of, in our region, the Boy Declaration. I welcome your intervention now.
Thanks, James. Good morning, everyone. So when I think about this peace humanitarian development nexus, it takes me back to a conversation about a decade ago in Geneva, where we were talking about this notion of connecting the dots. And we were specifically talking about violence against women and the fact that we see very different approaches across different domains. So for example, in the peace and conflict space, you see a lot of focus on prevention of GBV. Through a humanitarian lens, there's often a focus on protection of vulnerable groups. And then when you look at the sort of development framework, you're looking at issues like behavioural change, services for survivors, access to justice, and some of those elements. Yet at the end of the day, all of these issues have the same root cause: unequal power relations between men and women. And, you know, they have the same or similar manifestations in terms of physical, economic, emotional and sexual abuse. Yet we continue to take different approaches. We have a range of different actors responding and invest in very different things across these sort of different domains. And so really, I think what the Nexus approach challenges us to do is to look at how do we connect the dots, how do we integrate approaches for much greater impact and really to tackle these deep underlying causes of vulnerability. And I guess right at this moment, you know, we are facing a magnitude of challenges, which is really calling on us to take a much more integrated approach. The UN has termed this moment you know, 3 waves of crisis where we're seeing a global health pandemic intersect with a global economic recession and a hunger crisis fueled by climate change, which is effectively exposing the deep inequalities within and among societies in things like access to healthcare and economic security. That's why we see in a country like Australia, we have a lot of money to invest in economic stimulus, while near neighbours in the Pacific are struggling with debt distress and unable to fully fund basic public services and responses. This moment is also exposing glaring gender disparities. You know, in the Pacific and across all regions of the world, we've seen violence against women spiking, you know, as a result of, you know, economic restrictions, as a result of, you know, lockdowns and movement restrictions. Lucille also highlighted the economic impacts that COVID is having on women. You know, they estimate that 1 billion women who are working in low paid or precarious employment have been left destitute and without work as a result of COVID. I mean, these are phenomenal figures and they're definitely being felt in our region. You know, we also work with women in Vanuatu who, you know, have lost jobs as a result of restrictions around markets, restrictions around, you know, ability to work in informal employment, even through the tourism industry. You know, and at the same time, we also see women's unpaid labour rising in this moment, whether it's to look after children when schools close, to look after sick sick people when hospitals can't cope, even as Lucille's highlighted with, you know, even caregivers for people with disabilities. So I guess right at this moment, sort of the magnitude of the challenges that we face globally and in the region is really calling for us to break down this divide and to look at a more integrated approach and one that's also taking a gender transformative lens. And I think that if, you know, COVID is the moment, I would say that the Bowie Declaration is really the platform to be able to do this. You know, firstly, I guess it has identified that security goes well beyond narrow notions of national security. It recognises human security, humanitarian assistance and economic security all being intertwined. So we need to seize the opportunity of Pacific leaders' commitments around the Bowie Declaration to be able to drive more integrated approaches that maximise our resources. And I think also recognising the importance of any approach also making sure that climate change is central to you know, working at the nexus as what has been defined as the single greatest security threat to the region. One of the things I guess I wanted to offer to today's discussion and how we operationalise the nexus is a framework that we've developed for looking at gender responsive approaches to climate change and intersecting crises. This was a piece of work that involved women in Vanuatu who were consulted about some of their experiences, you know, in times of peace, in times of crisis, definitely when they were feeling the impacts of climate change. And it was developed in partnership with Monash University. And what we were trying to look at is how can we bridge this nexus and take a more integrated approach in ways that are actually addressing the gendered impacts of these intersecting crises. And this identified 4 critical things that are essential, you know, to be able to operationalise the nexus. The first one was recognising women's localised knowledge alongside the science. So, you know, we in all of our responses, we draw on scientific evidence, but we've yet to really tap into the knowledge that women have. And in the Pacific, it's often described as Indigenous knowledge. It's also the knowledge that women have acquired through their more traditional roles in communities over time that has never been tapped into or valued by our society. So how do we lift this up alongside the science? The second area is making sure that we do support women's participation at all levels and across all forums and spaces where we're looking at this nexus. And, you know, so that's everything from the local, the provincial, the regional and the national level discussions where we need to make sure women do have space at the table. And as Sharon often reminds us, that we also create new platforms for, you know, diverse women's participation. And And the third area is around recognising and resourcing the importance of women's collectives and organisations, you know, in building stronger resilience in communities. You know, women's organisations, women's collectives have a lot of trust in communities. They have strong networks and can really help us to get and reach the most vulnerable. So resourcing women's organisations has to be part of an agenda, you know, alongside and integrated with the focus around localisation. And most importantly, alongside these kind of efforts, we do need to tackle the harmful gender norms, you know, that continue to limit women's full potential and result in, you know, there being very strong gender inequalities being felt every time we hit a crisis. So that is kind of critical to do. And so I think that ultimately, you know, as we think about the nexus, as we think about moving forward, I think that we have to recognise that, you know, equal and just power and addressing these sort of harmful gender relations has to be at the heart of any agenda. And, you know, and Bowie Declaration can be our platform for driving this forward. So I'd start with those remarks, James.
Thank you, Michelle, for that intervention and those critical remarks. I think, particularly in the way in which you described these key issues that need to be addressed. Often we focus on very limited understandings of the issue of security, and so I think this offers us a chance to look a little bit more broader in the context of security. I'm very grateful that the Bowie Declaration, as you mentioned, goes beyond this traditional notion of security and takes us to looking at a more, as I would say, a more specifically holistic understanding. We try and do that, particularly in the region now, when we look at all the issues, recognizing the interconnectivity, and that's something that's been raised a couple of times through the earlier interventions. I look forward to perhaps we can discuss some of these key issues that you've raised after the other interventions, and maybe see how we can bring in our panelists to respond to these. As we talk about you know, this context of the broader context of peace, and as we look at the current pandemic, we look at the issues around economic crises that we see, the issue around climate, the climate crisis that we're in. It's also important to remember that there is an ongoing issue that has been with us since the first atom bomb or nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 70 years ago. And the role that the Pacific has been forced in as not only a place where the planes left from and returned, but also the ongoing nuclear tests that took place for 50 odd years after that. We are moving closer now to the implementation of the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. With, I think we're in 44 countries now, or somewhere around that number in terms of ratification. And so it's good for that we have Mary Joyce from the Peace Boat here to talk about progressing the action for nuclear disarmament. Mary is the Northeast Asia Regional Liaison Officer for GPPAC as well, and the International Coordinator of the Peace Boat. She's originally from Melbourne, graduated from the University of Melbourne and Kyoto University with degrees in politics and Asian studies. And she's been the international coordinator of the Peace Boat, which is a Japan-based international organization, for the last 15 years. The Peace Boat is the regional secretariat for GPPAC in Northeast Asia. And Mary, as I said, is the regional liaison officer. And in that capacity, she coordinates various peace-building, disarmament, sustainability, and conflict prevention-related programs within Japan and Northeast Asia. Among these is the Ulaanbaatar process, an ongoing civil society dialogue process for confidence and capacity building in Northeast Asia, which was launched 5 years ago. Mary also sits on the steering committee of the Northeast Asia Regional Peace Building Institute and is an advisory board member of the Women Cross DMZ, and is also involved in various coordination work as part of the Peace Boat's role as an international steering group member of the 2017 Nobel Peace Laureate, ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. She's also active as an interpreter and translator between Japanese and English, so she keeps herself very busy. Mary, as I mentioned, this conversation around peace can not be complete without talking about one of these issues that still hangs over us, the issue of nuclear weapons. So I welcome your intervention that will begin with the issue of nuclear disarmament. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope my microphone is all working okay so far. It's wonderful to be able to start this International Day of Peace together with you all. Always a great opportunity joining GPPAC Pacific events to learn so much from all of the different speakers and participants, and always come away with many new insights and inspirations. So first of all, thank you so much to everybody who arranged this space, and really glad to be able to share it with you all this morning. As Sharon mentioned in her opening, of course, this is a year of many anniversaries. 15th anniversary of GPPAC, Beijing 1325. But the 75 years since the foundation of the UN also means that it's 75 years since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This, of course, means 75 years since that year that the bombs took the lives of over 210,000 people within that first year, and also made many others suffer from indescribable pain, discrimination, grief, and fear of the unknown effects on their children and grandchildren. This, of course, was the beginning of the nuclear age, which has had such global impacts, as Reverend James just mentioned, including in the Pacific. So, of course, we're 75 years down the road from there, but the world is still facing this grave existential threat of nuclear weapons, which is really one of these threats on the scale also that we're facing, nuclear weapons, the climate crisis, and now the COVID-19 pandemic as well. So I'll just speak a little bit today about some of the action progressing for nuclear disarmament, and particularly on the framework of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the Nuclear Ban Treaty, which James has just mentioned as well. It may seem to be taking somewhat of a step away from some of the conversation that we've had, but I think, if anything, the experience and the wisdom of the Pacific shows more than anything the connections between the nuclear weapons discussion and the humanitarian aspects as well. And I'd particularly like to highlight how the process of the treaty itself has actually served to somewhat be a space to at least partially redesign the table, shall we say, in regards to disarmament discussions at the UN and on the international level as well. And I think this is really what has made this treaty so powerful and so significant in this way. So I'll briefly just introduce a little bit about the treaty at first. I'm sure some may be familiar, but the Nuclear Ban Treaty was adopted in 2017 at the United Nations by an overwhelming majority of the world's nations. This was following 10 years of advocacy by ICAN, but of course also many, many decades of tireless campaigning by people, including leading by the Hibakusha, the atomic bomb survivors themselves, not only from Japan, but also the survivors in the Pacific, traditional owners in Australia, and all over the world as well, where there has been these impacts of the nuclear age. So I particularly want to also pay respects to the leadership of the Pacific civil society in this, of course, including the Pacific Conference of Churches, the feminist leaders, and so on that are joining this discussion today as well. Before the treaty was adopted, nuclear weapons were the only weapons of mass destruction not subject to a comprehensive ban, despite their catastrophic, widespread, and persistent humanitarian and environmental consequences. So this new agreement, it fills, first of all, a significant gap in international law. It prohibits nations not only from using nuclear weapons, but also developing them, transferring them, possessing them, or even assisting or encouraging any engagement in these activities as well. Some other very important aspects as well, though, is the treaty also means that nations are obliged to provide assistance to all victims of the use and the testing of nuclear weapons, and to take measures for the remediation of contaminated environments. The preamble also acknowledges the harm suffered as a result of nuclear weapons, including the disproportionate impact on women and girls and on Indigenous people around the world. So these are all really landmark aspects of the treaty, which I'll speak a little bit more about as well. So it was 3 years ago, just yesterday, when the treaty first opened for signature. Of course, the Pacific states have taken a really leading role in this. And I think the fact that, the Pacific nations are taking this kind of role, it shows this, situation that they have really been forced into, as Reverend James just mentioned as well, these constructs of colonialism and racism and so on, which are still so tied up within the nuclear situation. So the treaty, after opening in 2017, once it reaches 50 countries ratifying, it will enter into force. As of right now, there's 44 states parties, but in just the next few hours, we're actually expecting that this will increase on the International Day of Peace. There's also several other important anniversaries coming up in the next week, which we have great anticipation for. We know there's many countries who are putting through their final preparations and so on within countries so that they can ratify as well. So we're hoping that the treaty will indeed actually enter force within this year, within 2020. Of this, of course, there are many Pacific states who have ratified: the Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Niue, Palau, Samoa, Vanuatu, and Aotearoa as well. So we really see that this is bringing the treaty very much closer to becoming more than just on paper, but really bringing it into reality as international law. But the success in the adoption of the treaty can, in quite a large way, actually be attributed indeed to this interaction between the peace and humanitarian aspects as well. And this is really where the significance of the treaty lies. It was through shifting the focus of discussions to the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons that the momentum to make the treaty a reality was actually made. And further, this also created the kind of situation where the non-nuclear weapon states, and particularly those which have been impacted by nuclear weapons, could have a really strong voice within discussions and actually in the shaping of this new international norm, rather than leaving as traditionally had been done, leaving these discussions up to the nuclear weapon states and those who, of course, have their interests in maintaining that power. The treaty, as I mentioned, is also important in that it explicitly addresses the environmental and humanitarian aspects of nuclear weapons, including the remediation and support for survivors. This commitment to assistance to victims, and also including the victims of nuclear testing, as well as the environmental redress, is crucial for all people and places that have been harmed by nuclear use and nuclear testing, and of course, the pursuit of justice for people in the Pacific Islands as well. Further, the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons anywhere in the world also threatens the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. By banning and working towards the elimination of nuclear weapons, we see that the treaty actually therefore reinforces the implementation of the SDGs. If we take, for example, climate scientists have shown that any limited nuclear war would cause significant climate disruption worldwide. It would include depletion of the stratospheric zone. It would reduce net primary productivity in oceans by up to 15%. And it could cause a drop in global ocean temperatures of up to -3 degrees Celsius. A more expansive nuclear war could result in global temperatures plummeting up to 10 degrees, causing a severe ice age that could end all human life. As well as this, we believe that the treaty is also very significant in the way that it recognizes the gender aspects of nuclear issues as well. It was actually the first international treaty to directly, on nuclear weapons, to do so. And this really was based upon the decades of norms which have been built up since Beijing. So we really see that within the nuclear disarmament field, this is something that could be seen as unprecedented. Bringing a gender perspective on nuclear weapons is important for three main reasons. Firstly, the use or testing of nuclear weapons disproportionately harms women and girls. Despite these disproportionate effects, however, women are underrepresented in decision-making regarding nuclear weapons. And third, the discourse around nuclear weapons itself is also highly gendered. Therefore, we also see that in order to fully implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda, states must address the specific impact of nuclear weapons on women and girls, work to ensure full representation of women in weapons negotiations, and also sign and ratify the Nuclear Ban Treaty. I'd also like to highlight how this new international framework, both in the process leading up to its creation, but also its contents, is also somewhat of a step towards remedying some of the very uneven power dynamics which are in place as well. This has allowed those impact both the countries who have been impacted by nuclear weapons and testing, but also individual survivors and communities to not only have a voice at the table, but to actually be part of reshaping that table. And then this in turn has allowed for the remaking actually of international law. It's only when this happens that such international agreements or frameworks can move from just being words on a page to actually being something that can serve to protect people's lives, securities, and futures. You know, often these nuclear disarmament issues are presented as just being these very hard traditional security issues, you know, just to be taken up by national security experts, shall we say. But this shift and the refocusing to the humanitarian aspects of nuclear weapons has allowed those who have been directly impacted and really have this firsthand experience to be recognized as the true experts on this issue as well. So I think this really comes back to that issue of how we ensure that communities' voices by those people who are actually being impacted are part of not only being heard from at the discussions, but are really shaping the direction that these norms are moving into as well. As has been mentioned by others, you know, the recent events of the COVID-19 pandemic shows us that these basic threats to humanity, you know, nuclear weapons, the climate crisis, and now also COVID-19, and also possible other waves of pandemics that we might be facing in the future, really present a danger to the whole world and to the well-being of all people. This means that we do need this broader approach to security, to redefine it to something which is genuinely human-centered. It must also be based on the principle of prevention. You know, the current situation that's being experienced all around the world shows us the urgent need for preventative measures such as strong public health foundations and safety nets and these sorts of things as well. And also the necessity for this to be done in an inclusive and sustainable manner as well. So within our discussions in GPPAC Northeast Asia, but I'm sure also within many other, you know, other partners all around the world, what we've really seen as one of the main lessons to be drawn from the pandemic is that just as radiation knows no borders, nor do viruses, we need to have these changes in the perceptions of security because we see how closely they really are intertwined. And so without all countries pulling together their resources and sharing their accumulated experiences to jointly address these threats, it will not be really possible to ensure that the resiliency of communities can actually be truly, coming into fruition or, you know, fulfilled in that way. And it's only in that way as well that we'll have real progress on the global frameworks and make sure that the genuine security of people can come first in this post-COVID world that we need to create together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that intervention. Last year, I accompanied representatives from the Maui Protestant Church and indigenous people from Maui Nui to the fourth committee at the UN in New York, where in their presentations, they talked about the impact of the nuclear testing on their families, on their lives. You know, not just those who worked on the sites where the nuclear tests were prepared, but also those who were forced by by not being informed of what was happening. And, you know, we're now looking at second and third generation as a result of the nuclear tests, who are people who are affected physically, medically, and of course, not only that, but psychologically as well. We hear stories now of the test site on Mororoa Atoll. There's a crack there which can break at any time and release toxic waste, nuclear waste into our oceans. The dome at Eniwatak in Runit and the Marshall Islands is also leaking. And in the context of climate change, with changing ocean currents, this is not just a concern for the Pacific, but for the rest of the world. So, you know, broadening the conversation around nuclear disarmament, as you mentioned, is so important, and looking at it from that humanitarian perspective. So I really want to thank you for that, for your intervention. And, drawing the connections between nuclear disarmament, the humanitarian nexus, and the importance of peace building. Our next presenter, or our next intervention, is Dr. Sue Weiss, who is the UNESCO Regional Advisor for Social and Humanitarian Science in Asia and the Pacific. She's also originally from Melbourne, but now based in Bangkok. Sue joined UNESCO in 2006 and spent 8 years in Samoa as a Social and Human Sciences Program Officer, working on a range of projects with youth on social inclusion, bioethics, creative industries, and education for sustainable development. In 2014, she transferred to the regional office in Bangkok and is working on youth and social inclusion projects across the region. Sue has acted as officer in charge for UNESCO in the Pacific and Hanoi, Vietnam. And prior to joining UNESCO, she was the executive officer of the Murray-Darling Basin Community Advisory Committee based in Canberra, Australia. She has worked on a range of community and natural resource management, capacity building, and community education projects in Australia, in Papua New Guinea, and in Fiji. Qualified teacher and trainer, and the founding principal of the FMQ Training, community-based TVET organization working with First Peoples in Australia and the unemployed in North Queensland. We're very grateful that you're able to join us from Bangkok, Sue. Opportunities for civil society engagement through engaging in peace building through education in the region, the Asia Pacific region. This is an area that you are committed to. Your views on how we can work together to build a lasting peace in our region and, of course, in the world. Thank you, sir.
Well, Vanaka, everybody, it's great to be in the Pacific, if only virtually. It's been quite a while. I feel almost like I'm there looking at you. I forgot to wear the right clothes, though. I'm out of touch. I wanted to talk a little bit. I actually work mostly on youth, as Reverend James said, but at UNESCO, we're currently trying to connect some of the dots together as being talked about through education. And this is a challenge, obviously, because we tend to silo everything. And I think when we talk about the nexus, this is the real challenge that we have, because we're always breaking things down into blocks. We do it with our disciplines. So even in UNESCO, our culture program works separately to our education program. So trying to bring them together is a challenge. And we also do them across the continuum between like the formal and the informal projects. And I think one of the challenges for the UN in particular is that the kind of mechanism that we have set up for ourselves leads us to predominantly work with government. So when we want to actually work across that continuum of community and government systems, it's not always that easy for us. So I just wanted to say a little bit more about education and where it's been going with peace. So peace education was actually really strong in the 80s. And there was a lot of work in UNESCO, particularly on a program called Building a Culture of Peace. And it was largely an education program. We had education for international understanding. And these were very, very big international programs. And then this was before my time, but I think because of the emphasis on the basics of education, and particularly through Education for All, where access to education was considered the first priority, to some extent, we've stepped back from some of those content-focused or integrated approaches to education to focus on the real basics of making sure every kid gets to school, making sure every kid has a minimum level of education. Now we've moved into a different mode with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're looking more at the quality of education. And I think from this perspective, things like peace education are able to come more to the forefront again. So when we're looking at quality education, there's a really strong connection with what we need to do to build peace, because we're actually looking a lot more at attitude and behaviors in education. So instead of just looking at a topic like environment or health or something else, we're not looking at content. We're looking very much at these underlying things about how do we change attitudes and behaviors. And there's been a lot of advances with things like brain neuroscience, how we understand how the brain works, which means that effective behavior change and attitudinal change is now more well understood from a scientific perspective. So I think that the challenge now is then going to be, how do we harness these things we need to build this into the education system? And then how do we build that continuum between like the formal school system and the community education? So we have this emphasis on social and emotional skills, and I think this is relevant wherever the education might fall. And changing attitudes and behaviors really needs this understanding of social and emotional skills, focusing more on, sometimes they're called soft skills, but things like communication, critical thinking. If we really want to be able to have dialogue about these issues, we need to provide opportunities for young people to have dialogue. In Asia, we often see education systems which are still very knowledge-based, very much about teachers directing students to be able to repeat certain things as opposed to being able to use those skills. So this kind of shift in the way we learn and how we encourage students to be able to use the skills and apply the skills is really important. And it means that we really need to change our education systems quite fundamentally. And I think nearly all of the governments in the region have recognized that and are all working towards this. But of course, it takes time. It means retraining teachers. It means providing new types of settings and materials in schools. But then how do we build the connections between schools and the communities is also a challenge, because again, we have two somewhat separate systems. So enabling them to work together requires new policies, requires new setups, requires new skills for the teachers. So I think that we have a lot of challenges, and what we're trying to do at UNESCO is to create a platform where we can do this. It's not so easy for us internally either. It does mean that we have to, as I said, tackle this on multiple fronts. So we not only have to work within the UN to link what we do. There's a lot of different efforts on building peace in the UN. We've heard a little bit about the GPS. There's also the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. There's disarmament. There's many other things. I haven't had much to do with climate change, but it's great to see that that's also being connected very strongly with peace in the Pacific. So we need to actually work to integrate at all of these different levels. And I think for us over the next 3 or 4 years, this is a challenge across the UN with everything. So I guess I don't have solutions, or I think everybody is becoming more and more aware of these challenges. But I think that one of the things that we really need to look at is how do we connect, particularly what organizations like GPPAC are doing with what's happening, for example, with the UN in the formal systems working with government. And this to me seems to be a significant challenge for us, and one that's worth quite a lot more effort in terms of what we do over the next few years. I'd just like to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Sue. I think it's the key issues that you have raised about the need for particularly what I like to call holistic education. I was interested, just as a side, on Friday there was a specific educational framework discussion going on about the types of education that we hope to see in our schools. And sometimes the focus was on methods of delivery and things like that. And I was asking about the same things that you raised, what sometimes people call soft skills or non-cognitive skills, and that are placed sort of secondary. But in this day and age, how do we bring things like critical thinking, which is usually introduced quite later in the education scheme? How do we get our children to become using the education system to help them become critical thinkers at a much earlier age, especially when we live in a world where it's a media-saturated world. We have so much out there on social media, etc. And the type of education that we are looking for in the context of climate change, in the context of trying to strengthen indigenous resilience or indigenous knowledge-based resilience, and that's something that Michelle was talking about earlier as well. What I'm hoping in the few minutes we have left is to open up the floor for a real talanoa. You've all been listening to each other, and give this opportunity for you to reflect or respond to anything that you've heard from the other interventions. But right now I'm just going to turn the camera around as we do, and you can smile at everybody as they remember what they look like. And we're going to, not Sharon, I'm going to ask John Tamani, who is the Restorative Justice Officer at the Pacific Center for Peace Building, to share his intervention as a message from PCP. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Reverend. The Pacific Center for Peace Building sends greetings to everyone on this occasion of 2020 International Peace Day, the theme for which is Shaping Peace Together. Peace Day is observed around the world each year on the 21st of September and provides a globally shared platform for us all to commit to peace, above all differences, and to contribute to build a strong culture of peace. Peace Day also provides us with an opportunity to remember those before us who have worked to promote peace and those who continue to elevate and amplify this work. As we celebrate Peace Day this year, we are mindful that we are in the midst of a pandemic that has changed our lives. It has affected us all through the many challenges that it has brought about at global, national, community, and family levels. People have been affected by job losses, loss or reduction of income, separation from loved ones, restrictions on movement, travel restrictions, cancellation of important events, and the inability to attend family gatherings to support each other. We also do not know when this will all end, but as we celebrate Peace Day, we pray for the peace of mind and spirit and strength to support our communities in sustaining each other and shaping peace together in these difficult times. Let us put aside our individual interests to embrace overarching community goals, which are for everyone's benefit and which are also an important part of our Pacific culture. Despite its many challenges, we continue to see daily examples of how the pandemic has brought humanity together. It has taught us to love, to care for, to respect, and to help one another. It continues to provide us an opportunity to spread compassion, kindness, and hope in the face of COVID-19. So as we celebrate Peace Day, let us continue to work together to prevent attempts to use the pandemic to promote discrimination and hatred, but to continue to build communities embracing peace, justice, and nonviolence which is the foundation of Pacific Center for Peacebuilding's vision. So we wish everyone a happy International Peace Day. Thank you.
Naka. Thank you very much for that, John. So friends, we have tasted each other's food in that sense at this table. We have shared of our food. We have shared of what is what we serve and what we provide in our work to promote peace, to build, strengthen the cause of peace, particularly around the humanitarian peace and development nexus. You've shared your own perspectives, and I'm mindful of a couple of things that have been brought up. One is the key message that many of you shared about the challenges of inclusivity, the challenges of having those conversations and opening up and calling and ensuring that the table is either redesigned or more people are brought to the table, and in fact, who sits where at the table is also important. So the broadening of the table, the inviting of more people to the table, and the challenge of, as Sue mentioned, siloism. This is one of the challenges that we face when we all become specialist organizations working on key issues. The need to actually sit at the table where we listen to each other's perspectives, what we're all working in, and trying to see what is that common space that we can come to and how we can work more inclusively in this. How do we move the conversations? How do we move the policies from paper to reality? Is an important question for us. And how do we move towards more inclusion, greater inclusion, particularly when we're talking about building resilience? And in the context, I guess, we have climate change on one hand, we have the issue of nuclear disarmament, we have the huge inequalities that we see, not the least in the case of gender inequality, and people that come from diverse backgrounds. How do we ensure this meaningful inclusion to ensure that people's security come first? The table is open. Anyone would like to jump in? This is the space. Don't all speak at once.
Can't ask Michelle.
Oh, Michelle.
I'll start us off. I know we haven't got long. I mean, look, I'm always mindful that if you ask a woman in the community, she doesn't have these silos. It's her life and it's impacting her in many different ways. So I do believe that at the heart of breaking down these silos and driving more integrated approaches is to make sure that, you know, the most vulnerable groups are at the center of our approaches. And I think that's critical, and driving solutions. And I think, you know, through the Agenda for Humanity that came out of the World Humanitarian Platform, there was a commitment to provide greater resourcing to local organisations. And, you know, we've yet to see governments really enact that commitment at a sufficient measure. So I think that has to be at the heart of it, resourcing local solutions, putting the most vulnerable at the centre. And that includes making sure that diverse women's voices are, you know, part of driving forward different approaches. Through the Shifting the Power Coalition, we've really put a focus on, you know, women with disabilities and young women, because we see that it's not sufficient just to take a generic approach to women. We have to look at how age intersects, how disability intersects alongside gender inequality. So I think that's critical. And I guess the final thing I would offer is just also what we've seen is the real value of working in coalitions. You know, through the Shifting the Power Coalition, we've been able to work across borders in the Pacific. We're working in 6 different countries. It's been a way that we can share knowledge, share resources, share skills, learn from each other, work together, and really maximise, you know, the collective power of local organisations. So I'd say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle, for that response. Anyone else before I ask an additional question?
sure.
Go, Lucille. We'll go Lucille then Sue.
Thank you. I think from listening to everyone and journeying, for me, moving from paper to reality would be stepping on the roadmap of peace and journeying with people in peace building, like what we are doing here today, claiming our spaces on the table or on the mat as women, men and youth through multi-stakeholder process, capacity building, empowerment, accountability action, and shared lessons learned so that we're able to support decision making.
Thank you, Lucille. Over to you, Sue.
Yeah, I think one of the things we find most difficult with our UN work is providing the spaces for the dialogue and to bring the community together. And community groups are generally a lot better at this than us, I would say, in general. But one of the things we find a lot with the youth work is that there's a certain audience out there that we connect with. But connecting with the wider community and creating those spaces that will bring them in and engage them in the conversation to be part of the dialogue is actually really difficult. And there are, of course, there are access issues. And if COVID has shown us one thing, it's that we can be a lot more versatile in creating spaces for people to come together. So maybe that's a positive. But I think we just had a call out for youth to be involved in a response to COVID, and we had 6,200 young people respond. And this is something that we've never seen before. And so somehow or other we got this one right, because typically we'll get like 50 or 60 applicants for youth to come. When we had the YPS consultations a couple of years back, we didn't get more than 60 applications for young people to come and be involved. So somehow we have to use the coalition better to reach out on our networks in a multiple way that bring these different people together into the spaces, because otherwise we continue to have a kind of an exclusive conversation when we do things. And I really think that if we want to be inclusive of the women's agenda, the youth agenda, Indigenous people's agenda, all of these other things, we really need to somehow work more on the coalition of willing partners. Just my thoughts.
Thank you, Sue. I saw Agus sit up and pay attention and turn his camera on, which is very important. Given that, particularly with this new climate security and peace building project that's been initiated, one of the things you mentioned, Agus, was around multi-sectoral engagement. Your response, particularly you've also engaged in this work around the world and in our region.
Yeah, thanks, James. Sorry, colleagues, I have to turn the camera on and off because of the internet connection is not very great here. But so do apologize for that. On few things that listening to colleagues and various panelists talking about what can we do and what area of things that probably we can work together and how to really advance this. And for me, there's few things that important. I mean, there are instruments available and exist that for us to work, and this instrument is I think Sue mentioned of various instruments on women, peace, security, youth and peace, security resolution, and various other resolutions that is within the UN context. So the question how we can use this instrument effectively. I mean, reality is many people, a woman in a small place in Solomon Islands probably never heard of this instrument, but they are actually not devoid of activities in pushing that space on the table in the discussion about lands right, in the discussion about investment of economic investment in the islands, in the discussion and in ensuring they are in the leadership of even traditional society. And adding to that, I mean, the initiative with introduction of this instrument, I think we might be able to amplify and we might be able to really strengthen the voices of many of the vulnerable groups, the marginalized groups. I don't really like the term of marginalized group, but I mean the groups that usually left out from that table or that discussion. And I completely agree on extending that and making it a bigger table for all. And I think this is something that we can work together. I would like to really subscribe to the idea of the multi-stakeholder platform or dialogues that Sharon mentioned. I mean, we have this. We see this platform in some places in the region, in the Pacific, at the national level, definitely for sure, because I witnessed that and involved in setting up some of them. But I think we can really make this more effective, strengthen this platform, especially at the regional level. I mean, there's few key actors there among the policymakers that need to engage regularly with women leaders, with youth leaders, who also engage regularly with the women grassroots and youth grassroots across the country. And then the question how to follow Michelle, example, how to connect that groups and dots, I guess, into one. So this is something that probably we can work together, and we'll be delighted to be part of that or to facilitate some of that process if necessary. But I think there are, I mean, knowing there is not devoid of initiative, knowing there is instrument, knowing there is policy makers that willing to listen, willing to be part of this, knowing there are existence of very active, vibrant civil society across the Pacific. I think this is something, a good basis for us to really do something collectively. And I would like to propose that in a way. And I mean, other thing I think we mentioned, looking at the note here on human security agenda, I think this is something big for us. It's something that is important for us. And the Pacifics actually, including the Pacific leaders, I think have emphasis this. So now we need to move, and this is also include in context of women's participation. I mean, we see progression in the region, but we see also regression on women's political participation and women's participation in this agenda. We are the region that have two countries, in fact 3 countries in a way we include, so that have no women's empowerment in the world. I mean, this is a regression for us, and something that we cannot be proud, but we need to work together on that. The commitment, many leaders that had talked to, met and engaged across the Pacific before and now.
Looks like August's internet is playing up. Oh, you're back on? Very good.
Yeah, sorry.
Conclude your sentences. Carry on.
Yes. So the question is how to really get the leaders move beyond the rhetoric. They are subscribing to increasing women participation. In fact, some of them subscribing to the idea of temporary special measure, but all at the rhetorical level right now, or most of them, sorry, not all, but most of them are rhetorical level. And so this is something that through this coalition, through this partnership, through this work, I think we can try to move beyond that rhetoric, commitment, into more tangible. Where is the budget? We have enough budget allocated to do this, both regionally, both nationally? Where is action taken? And I think this is our partners, these our leaders. This is and they are going this month. They go into the General Assembly to report back or to highlight some of their commitment. So in practice, so I think the civil society, many groups, UN can also continue to push that agenda together. I think I end here. I talk too much, but I will respond. I will have to apologize again. I have to stop the video again, just in case, enable me to listen to you properly. Offer.
Thank you, Agus. We've seen the success of people working together and bringing the humanitarian nexus in the issue around nuclear disarmament. So, Mary, would you like to share something on this one?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think one of the words that so many people are coming back to is the issue of coalitions and working beyond silos and that sort of thing. And I think in the disarmament field, that's also been really crucial and has been really the game changer, I think, in what allowed that discourse to be moved from, you know, the people who used to have this exclusivity over within these, you know, nuclear discussions to these humanitarian aspects that I was talking about as well. And the success of bringing about the treaty, and then also the work that's still going on now, has only really been possible because the coalitions of the civil society groups that were working towards this also went beyond those groups that were traditionally involved in, you know, disarmament or nuclear-related fields, but also bringing in feminist groups, environmental organizations, those working on climate, you know, humanitarian organizations. You know, the involvement of the ICRC at the beginning of that process was really decisive, I think, in shifting, showing that this is not just talking about the weapons themselves, this is not just talking about national security, but it's really talking about lives and livelihoods and safety of people everywhere on the planet. So that shows, I think, an example of what can be happen when coalitions that do have their own different expertise, do have their own different focus, are able to actually come together and not only connect the dots, but really show how that can actually shape something new together as well, and really create a new norm together as what occurred in that treaty. So I think, you know, as you know, the work of GPPAC Pacific highlights that so well, I think always as well, how these different issues are all so deeply intertwined. And as other speakers have said, this has, in a very in-your-face way, we could say, through COVID-19, really everybody's confronted with that reality and that situation as well. I think the other thing I just want to highlight, which is not so much disarmament itself, but also something whenever I'm hearing the experiences from the Pacific, is this regional approach and how important and useful that is. While in some respects, you know, that does develop because of the necessity, at the same time, it's really crucial if there is actually to be change on the broader level, and for that to then have that kind of accountability on the national level as well. And particularly from our experience in GPPAC Northeast Asia, because this is a region where there are still countries that do not have diplomatic relations with each other. There's very high tensions. There are no regional organizations, regional mechanisms for peace and security. And that's when I think both on the governmental level, but also on the civil society level, these examples of regional collaboration and cooperation is always very, very inspiring, and I think gives us a lot of hints of what we can really aspire to, or what kind of mechanisms that we would want to see in our region as well. So just when we're looking at the sort of multilateral aspects as well, I just wanted to really highlight the importance of that regional cooperation. And really that's something that I think Northeast Asia is wanting to learn more and more from the Pacific experience as well, whether it's collaboration on WPS, on humanitarian issues and disasters, you know, all of these different aspects too. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. They're the 2 points that I really wanted to take home. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Those are key issues, and within the context of regional approaches, collaboration, working together, the need for us to hold each other accountable is very important. The role of civil society, and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretary General has often said that's the key role, one of the key roles of civil society, is to hold governments, hold collective organizations like PIFs, etc., accountable, and calling them out when they don't work in the interests of the region. And that's also sometimes a challenge when bilaterals get in the way of multilateralism or regionalism. But this is the key issue that we are facing. And August, also thank you for sharing about one of the key things. If you want to make a commitment, you've got to put a budget to it. And on that note, we hand over to Sharon for some last comments in her intervention.
Thank you. Thank you, friends, for joining us today. We're still on Pacific time, so we have gone a little bit over our hour and a half. But just to also say, we redefined the table as well, or the time zones. So this is actually the first of GPPAC's 4 virtual peace table. So thank you for joining us on our Pacific Island time. Quite often, as Pacific Island people, we have to join other times. So we really appreciate all of you joining. We join in uplifting 2 points, I think, that have come together that really resonate for me. And as a number of you have said already, the coalition and networking approach. So today's virtual peace table has been an example of the multi-stakeholder approach that we believe in. So we thank our UN partners. Thank you, Michelle, for bringing your wisdom also in seeing what we mean when we talk about the triple nexus, and for Mary for bringing the importance of the humanitarian action that is needed, but also the link with one of the key messages for us from the Pacific in terms of demilitarization. If we talk about a peaceful Pacific, how do we really uplift the human security agenda that our leaders have made commitments to? In 2016, in fact, the GPPAC Pacific Gender Focal Point saw the opportunity to bring together the peace building work with the work of humanitarian partners, in particular through the feminist agenda of ActionAid Australia, and of course the development priorities, as Michelle said, looking at the specific needs of young women and women with disabilities. So women have been demonstrating for at least 2 years for the adoption of the Bonn Declaration of what the peace, development and humanitarian nexus is all about. And today as GPPAC Pacific, we're very pleased that the Pacific Conference of Churches brings to us the community of faith leaders, and the work that our partners are doing in the Pacific Island countries it continues to show the importance of engaging through our traditional systems and working with traditional leaders. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why Andi Vasu from Transcend Oceania is not with us today, because she's busy in Vanuatu working with traditional leaders as part of her work and the ongoing work. So in 2020, together as civil society, here in the Pacific, we have been able to demonstrate that despite the COVID crisis, we can find ways through our work as peace builders, as humanitarian actors, as people working together in this triple nexus coalition of bringing the perspectives of diverse women, particularly women from rural and remote communities of our island countries, of young women, of women with disabilities, and our faith and traditional leaders in organizing together. I think that is part of our commitment, but at the same time, in doing that, we will continue as civil society to call on member states, our governments, our regional intergovernmental organizations, and even the United Nations to be accountable to these commitments of multi-stakeholder partnership, and to join with us in making sure that we can see a shift in the resources, because these are the commitments that have also made to our protection work, our prevention work, and our participation work. So with that, thank you, and we'll keep this up on Facebook as well to make sure that others can continue to join in the conversation as well. So from all of us here in Suva, Vinaka, Shukriya, peace. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Mary, to Sue, Michelle, August, to Lucille, to John, also for your peace message from PCP. And we are very grateful that PCC can be part of this conversation around the table. We hope to be part of the ongoing conversations in various places and various tables. You know, the guy that was our boss was a carpenter, so we can help build the tables that we need. As we conclude this webinar, this talanoa, this conversation, once again from all of us, very happy and peaceful International Peace Day. Just a reminder for us, it's not only International Peace Day, it's also World Zero Emission Day, Carbon Emission Day. So this is a very as carbon neutral as we could get. Sorry, I don't have solar power on the roof just yet. But as we are practicing peace with one another, the humanitarian nexus, let's also not forget the rest of the environment. Let us make this truly a global peace event with our work as peace for the whole planet. So thank you all very much for your participation in this webinar. Thank you to those who have attended the webinar online on Zoom and on Facebook Live. We'll keep this available for people to watch and follow up, and we look forward to the other peace tables that we'll be gathering. Mary has shared that, and I put that on the chat for anyone else who wants to follow the other peace tables throughout the day, if you can stay awake. So God bless you all, and have a very blessed and peaceful International Peace Day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And goodbye. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.